All right. So, Marissa, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to hear your story. Thank you so much for reaching out.
Thank you. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, I know, right? My one of excuse me. Some of my favorite guests are guests who have listened to the podcast and reach out and want to tell their story. Kind of, they're inspired by this whole process, and I feel like it's very cathartic to kind of have that full circle moment. So yeah, I'm curious. You were diagnosed. How recently were you diagnosed?
About a year ago.
A year,
or maybe a year and a half, somewhere around there.
Okay, so it was, post-pandemic lockdown craziness. I feel like there's like before pandemic and post-pandemic life timelines.
I think so. I mean, it probably was. Now that I'm thinking of it, yeah, it probably was around then.
And you were talking to your therapist about some of the symptoms around anxiety, or what was happening in your life specifically that brought up this whole conversation that you might start looking into ADHD.
I was having a lot of anxiety. I've always been a pretty anxious person. Like all of my life, I can think back now and still see it. But I was also really depressed at the time. And I wasn't really sure why. I mean, I had a lot of things in my mind, but everything was going good overall. But I was just really depressed and I could not figure out why. And it was around like the time of COVID. So I don't know if it's that whole, getting everything shutting down and kind of everything staying in its place, which honestly at the beginning I didn't actually mind because I'm very introverted. So I was like, oh, yay, we get to, encourage people to stay home. So, I liked that. But then after a while, I was like, okay, I don't like this as much as I thought I was going to. So for me, it was the anxiety and then the depression got worse. And then like at the time my son was younger, so he was here and I was very present, but at the same time, I don't feel like I was appreciative of everything. And I feel that for me, that was a problem. And so I didn't like feeling that way around him because I felt like I was going to, I don't know, somehow have him, have these memories of me not being happy with him. And I didn't want that because I'm very much happy with him and being around him. I enjoy it. It's my favorite time. So I really knew I needed to get help. And I think I'd been knowing that even before COVID, and I just kept pushing it. And then finally I was like, you need to go get help. Like, there's no point in trying to suck it up and trying to work it out on your own, because obviously that hasn't helped. So.
Yeah, right. I mean, I feel like that's a theme that something we talk about a lot on this podcast. For those, so many of us are diagnosed with depression and or anxiety before ADHD even surfaces as a concept. And thinking about like, what is it when the depression the depression diagnosis just like never feels like it fits, right? And yes. I had a very similar experience where I was like, why am I depressed? Like, my life is great. I have a wonderful partner. I have healthy children. Like, I don't feel like I have specific reasons in my life to be depressed. And then it's almost like it's one more thing to be depressed about, which is like, why do I insist on being depressed when evidence is to the contrary? And I think it speaks more to this idea of like, that feeling like we are broken, like that, like I feel like a bad partner, I feel like a bad mother, I feel like a bad, entrepreneur, like or employed. Like, there's all of these feelings that come back to like how a lot of this depression comes from feeling like we're hurting the people in our life, or we're bad, and that there's something we're doing wrong.
Yes, definitely. You put it perfectly. That's exactly like what was going on and the way I was feeling. And yeah.
Yeah, right. And then it's sort of like, it's this, really wanting to get to the bottom of it, and why I get so frustrated when I hear women whose therapists have said, like, let's deal with the depression first. Because it's like, well, no, there's like, this is, there's a reason why I'm sad. And I'm not saying that depression is always a misdiagnosis, but I think there's just so much more happening under the surface that needs to be addressed.
Definitely.
Okay. So was it your therapist who suggested ADHD, or?
Yes. When I was talking to her one day, well, around the time of that, that was kind of when everything was like talking, when more women were talking about ADHD and all that stuff. So I kind of heard about it, but then I was talking to her and I was like, saying like, I don't know why I've always had, the anxiety. I've always had kind of that depression. And I'm like, and I was naming off other symptoms. And so she was like, well, maybe, based on what you're seeing, you may have ADHD, but she's like, I would go to, I think she recommended like the ADHD questionnaire. I can't remember from the site. She's like, you should go to that and see how you do. And she's like, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, just, fill out the questionnaire and then they'll let you know based on your results, like where you are at. And when I took the test, I was like, all these questions were like totally resonating with me. And I'm like, okay, this is scary, but at the same time, this is good, so it's kind of that mixed bag of feelings. And then when I got my results, they were like through the roof. And I was like, oh, I did great on a test, but not the test that I was thinking that I would do good on, type of thing. So, but I just kind of stared at it honestly for a while. And I was like, wow, this is not what I was expected, but at the same time, it was like, it felt right. Like I don't know. Like I said, I had to sit there and just kind of think, okay, this is all this time that I've been having these experiences in my life or these feelings in my head of like, why this or, whatever, then this like confirmed it for me. Like, okay, this whole time has been an issue or my issue or, that type of thing. So.
Right. Yeah. I think that speaks to so many of our experiences of having that visceral reaction to a diagnosis of ADHD, where you're just like, it's a pretty good sign that you're on the right path when you have that like, oh my God, this feels like the answer to so much, right? And that it speaks to that feeling like something was off, that something was missing and that this could actually be the answer, and how important it is for us to have that identity, that label, that diagnosis. Because I think that's another thing, especially with therapists, that sometimes they don't want to, they might like they might be reluctant to, pathologize some of the issues in terms of depression and anxiety, where they might be like, want to like hold off on the diagnosis of ADHD. Whereas I feel like for our experience, it's so important. That label is so important because it feels like it's the answer, right?
Yes, definitely. And well, the good thing too is like my therapist, when I interviewed two different therapists, and I went with the one I'm currently with, and she's amazing. And really the reason I went with her is just because she did make me feel like anything I said or anything I did was like, she wasn't judging me. She really did want to help me. And so whenever I talked to her about the ADHD thing, she was like very open and very supportive. And then when she was like, after I got my answer or my quiz, she was saying like, you should go talk to your psychiatrist. And I talked to my psychiatrist about it. And my psychiatrist was like, yeah, I think based on this and a lot of your other stuff, she's like, I'm pretty sure you have that. So we went from there.
Oh, that's awesome. That's yeah. I think that's another thing that, is important for when you're seeking the right therapy relationship too, is how do you feel heard, right? And if you have somebody who's like, no, I don't think that's it, I think it's this.
Yeah,
like that's probably a red flag.
Right. Yeah. I'm thankfully I didn't run into that. And I think it's honestly because of your show and then other things I've seen on the internet about, their therapists, not recognizing the issue and not letting them talk about it. Like that was like, to me, like, oh my God, I'd hope to God it never happens to me, because you're already dealing with enough stuff. And then when you're having your own therapist tell you, no, I think you're wrong, you're like, okay, I think I know myself pretty well. So yeah, that would have been traumatic.
Right. Yeah. I mean, talk about, or even just going to a doctor's appointment, right? And having that 15 minutes where you're just like, you feel so rushed and so dismissed at the best of times.
Right. Yes.
Right. And to have so many women who've like had that experience where the doctor's like, no, everybody thinks they have ADHD nowadays. Don't be ridiculous. And you're like, oh God. If you even talk about a doctor's appointment as a traumatic experience, then that's a pretty good sign that you might want to look into ADHD, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So now looking, once you did the self-test and really started connecting the dots, what were some of the things that you looked back on over the course of your life where you were like, oh, right, the signs were there all along?
Well, I know like in grade school, I had a speech therapist come, and I to this day, I can't really remember bits and pieces of it. I only remember bits and pieces of it, but she remember her coming to my classroom, taking me out of the classroom, and then us going over stuff, but I don't remember what. I remember I know I didn't care for her, and I don't really know why I didn't care for her. I don't know it's because she was pulling me out of class, so it brings that, that extra attention to you of, why are they getting out of class type of thing. Or if it's just something, I'm not sure. I really wish that I remembered why I did not like that whole situation, or maybe it wasn't explained to me, and that like that whole like why is this happening type of thing made me confused, and obviously I felt upset about it. So that right there was, like I said, like in elementary school. And then throughout high school, or even through middle school, I feel like I didn't get a good foundation of some stuff. So it made me by not having that foundation, it made me feel like I was building like a house on sand, basically. Like there's a lot of disconnections between various things in the subjects of like, especially math. Math was like my, I just liked it. Like I'm good with arithmetic, but all the other like geometry, all this other stuff, I'm like, no, thank you. So when I went through high school, I was very much, I would say probably on the rebellious side of that, because I was not wanting to participate in the things that didn't interest me, like math. And I loved science. Oh my God, I love science. Thankfully, I had some great teachers that were really, they recognized that, yes, it took me a little while longer to learn it, but they recognized that I really wanted to know it. So that's something. I think the other thing though too is so I've had multiple careers. So when I switched careers, I went into physical therapy. And when I was taking my courses, that was challenging because you're learning about the body, you're learning about all these different things, how the body works. And I feel like whenever I would go take a test, that was for me like a challenge, because I would know the answers, but when I took the test, it was like I would go blank. And it took me so much longer to finish those tests. And so I wouldn't end up passing them, because it would take me, I'd be focusing on this one question for like 5 minutes. And then if I had a question about the quiz question or the test question, my teacher was not very helpful with that. I feel like he was he had tricky questions. Like they were like, you could have been read either way. Like it was like a double negative type of question. And when I'd ask him for clarification, he was not helpful at all. So I just felt like that whole time I was struggling, but my professor saw it, and they actually had me, had a talk with me, and they're like, you need to go have, like testing accommodations done, because we think the information, it just takes you a lot longer to complete the test. So when I went to a therapist to get tested, he was like, yeah, you have like a comprehension type of disability. So I'm going to give you accommodations for your classes to have that extra time to take your tests. So for me, that was very helpful. Cause then after that, I was like, okay, I can do this, like it really gave me that confidence, cause I was so stressed at that time. I mean, like I was losing weight like crazy. And, cause I was just like, I didn't want to eat. I mean, that was like a very high anxiety, like it was not, to me, that was like a traumatic time, because I was like, didn't know what was going on. I wanted to learn it, but the more I wanted to learn it, the less my brain was like, hey, let's sit down and read this. Cause my brain was like, let's go clean instead. Cause that's more, that's something that you're actually doing. Whereas if you're sitting down and reading, I don't really want to do this. I'd rather do something else. So it was, I think, a combination of that, like not wanting to read the information that I really wanted to know, but just the whole aspect of sitting down and reading it. And then also taking a long time with my tests, really helped me determine like, okay, I could have seen this whole time. I just didn't know what it was or what was going on.
Right. I totally relate to that idea of like, I love learning, but just don't ask me to explain it back to you.
Right. Yes.
And we talked about this. It was one of my guests who called it like stuck on input, right? This idea of just like it's the processing of the information that is the difficult thing, right? And it's also it's also depends on the testing style and all of that. And it's so fascinating to learn that you were, told that you had like some kind of comprehension learning disability, right? Because I've always felt like when I was growing up, I always felt like I had some kind of learning disability because I couldn't understand where I was like, I've been to all the classes, I've done all the reading, I'm in the discussion, I'm doing everything right. And then I sit down to the test and it's like that moment of panic of just like, I don't know the answer. Was this even something we covered? Like just totally panicking.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Or that feeling, like you said, like, why wasn't this explained to me in the way that I need it, right? But not even really being able to articulate like what you needed in that moment. I think that's super relatable. I also like when you were talking about the childhood where you were like, I didn't know if you're like, I had the speech therapist and I can't tell you anything about the experience. I could just tell you I didn't like the therapist, which I think is very relatable too, right? Like I feel like with books and stuff, like I'll have read a book. I can't tell you anything about the book or a movie, but I can just tell you if I liked it or not.
Yes. Yes. I mean, actually, I'm becoming more and more like that. Like when I was younger, I was like, I could name off like every detail of a movie. And then now, I don't know if it's because my attention span is
kids.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yes. And I'm like, I don't know if I've seen that movie. And my husband will be like, yes, you have. And I'm like, oh, okay.
I know, right? I feel like that. I don't know if it's kids or aging or, yeah, I don't know. But I definitely, my working memory has gone off a cliff. And I had this similar, there's a lot that I was fascinated with when I was younger that I could have told you, all the details about. And now I'm like, yeah, no, I just don't have it.
Yes.
Here we are. Now, one of the things I thought was like had ADHD written all over it was I was reading an interview that was like a Kansas City magazine interview where you had said when you were going to school where you were like, my heart was torn between either design or being a surgical technician. And I was like, only somebody with ADHD could have those two things be sort of similar passions, right? And be like,
yes.
I could do either one of those. And how can I possibly choose? It made me laugh because I was like, oh yeah, the signs were there all along.
Yeah. And actually now that you say that is true. I didn't even think of it like that. So yeah, those are two very different things. But at the same time, I'm like, which one do I go through or do, that type of thing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you chose design, but then you, after a while, decided to go back to school to become a physical therapy assistant. Right. And then you did that for a couple years and then you were burnout. It was burnout, but also you were having like stress and what was going on there?
Well, really, it was probably mostly burnout for me. I remember being in there. I was working in the clinic with the geriatric population, and I loved it. But at the same time, I would come home, and the patients that I could not help really stuck out in my mind more, and I would just be going over it in my head over like during the night, like, okay, how can I help this patient in a different way that, like sometimes it was a financial way. And I'm like, I know I can't give my money away to everybody because then we're not going to be able to, pay our own bills type of thing. But it really, for me, was not being able to check that part of my work at the door type of thing. Like I couldn't leave it at work. And I know so many people that were able to do that. And I was always just like so fascinated by that because I could not step out of that. Like I kind of brought it home with me. And at the time I didn't realize it really wasn't fair to my husband because I'd be preoccupied with those thoughts of like, okay, how can I do this? How can I do that? Or whatever. And then after we had our son, I knew I really couldn't do that because it's just, that's a whole different experience there. And so at that time, a lot of things were kind of happening all at once. Like one of my patients that I had been treating had, I'd been treating him over like several years or a couple of years really. And he kept coming back. Whenever he came back, he requested for me to be his therapist, and I adored him. And then, he unfortunately, he had an accident and he passed away suddenly. And it was like, in that moment, for me, it was like, I don't know, it tore me open, really. I mean, like, I was like, but at that time I was already kind of getting down to the end of my line, so to speak, of therapy or the whole experience. So after he passed away, and I was actually pregnant at the time, it just really, it really kind of changed everything and how I saw everything. I don't know. It was very, and I didn't understand why it was happening. And then shortly after that, my aunt, who I was really close to, she passed away suddenly. And that was like the nail in the coffin. I mean, not to be, no, I don't know the right word for it, but I'm not trying to be funny about it. It's just like, that's for me how it was. Like, after she passed away, that was really hard for me. And thankfully at the time, my boss, when I was working in the clinic, was very understanding. But I think after that, that just kind of took the wind out of me, and I wasn't able to kind of go back to it. I think also too that after I had my son, I didn't know I had PMDD, which is post. Now I can't think of it. Post having a baby. Sorry.
Yeah, what is PMDD? I got to look it up because I always put it was postpartum.
Yes,
but
postpartum.
It's officially called PMDD, and now I'm trying to think of it. Oh well.
Hold on, I can look it up. I don't know if you want to, but I won't do that. But yeah, I was suffering from depression from all the hormones I was experiencing, and I didn't know that until several months later when I went to the doctor and they took a quiz. I took a quiz on there and they're like, yeah, you're really depressed. And I couldn't stop crying. And so around that time, I was just like, I wanted to be around my son more, because when I worked in the Medicare system, and when you're working with Medicare or even Medicaid, really, you're always there. And like, you're, even for holidays and stuff. And I'm like, my husband and I struggled to have a child for like 3 years because I had PCOS. And so I was like, why we tried so hard to get him here, and then I'm not going to be able to see him. I'm like, that to me was not something that I felt okay with. So, all of those kind of a combination of everything kind of put me into where I'm like, I was getting burned out. Like, each thing was kind of another punch to the face type of thing. Like, I can't take it anymore. I was like, in doing this, yes, I love it. But by that point, it wasn't like a love. It was something I had to do. And I knew at that moment, like, if I have to do it, I don't want to do it, because that means that it's taken like that compassion and everything that I love about helping people. It's taken it out of that. And I don't want to be one of those people where, like, they're doing a job, but you can tell they hate it. And I did not want that at all. When I work with people, I want them to know that I'm truly there for them and that I love what I'm doing. And I didn't want them to see that other side of, I'm just doing this as a job. That's not what I ever wanted for anyone to experience, because that really affects the treatment of everything. So that's what made me, and actually before my aunt passed away, she could kind of tell that I was getting burned out, but I didn't really know the way out. So she was like, you should go back to doing design. You should go back, she's like, you're really talented. You should do it. She's always trying to find ways for me to help her with her designs. Or my uncle, he had kind of was thinking about doing a consultation type of business. And she's like, you should create a logo for him. I mean, she was always trying to get me to do all these things. And I'd always be like, no, I'm not a designer anymore, or I don't do that anymore. I was always just like pushing those ideas away. And I think really it's just because I was scared. And after she passed away, it really, like I said, it rocked my world. And it, I don't know, her passing made me feel like, okay, I need to do something with my life. Like, I'm burned out with this. I still want to work. I still need to work. And so I went back to design, and I started doing that kind of, as a, I don't know, I guess now I kind of think of it maybe as kind of a note to her, as far as like, hey, I'm doing this. Let's see where it goes. And I really enjoyed it. And at that time I was just trying to dabble in it again, because I wasn't sure if it was something I wanted to do. And so I was creating people's logos and stuff like that. But then after a while, when I ended up going to a different company, And that was actually in an office. I was thinking it was going to be less demanding, and it was not. And so I started really amping up my business then, because I was like, I don't want to work at this place anymore. And it was a mutual feeling, I think, between my ex-employer and myself. And so when I left, I was like, I'm going to go full time in my business, which worked out because I was, kind of getting more clients at that time. So I just jumped right in and started my business. But it took all these other things to push me into doing that. Cause I don't think if these other things would have happened, I don't think I would be doing what I'm doing. I think it would have taken a lot more, and thankfully it didn't need it. Thankfully nothing else had to happen, but those were kind of like those factors that really pushed me into what I'm doing now. And then with this, it just provided more flexibility.
It's kind of a double-edged sword. Think about like so many neurodivergent people, especially women, are driven by social justice, right? Are driven by doing the right thing and end up in careers like social work or, compassionate care careers. And then you end up with compassion fatigue where it's like my life is suffering as a result of helping others. And like, what do you do with that? Like, and as you were talking, I was thinking about this idea of like compartmentalization, right? And how we have a difficulty with filtering information, right? We have a difficulty with prioritizing. We have a difficulty deciding which tasks are important and which aren't. So it makes sense that would also happen when it comes to emotions and compartmentalizing emotions. And like, they all happen at once and we feel things so deeply and so much. And you're like, I don't know what the answer is. Like, how are people able, like you said, how are people able to compartmentalize in that way? What are some of those skills that need to be like explicitly taught in, especially in schooling, when you're being trained for these positions? Because I think they talk about like compassion fatigue and they talk about burnout as, and this idea of like, make sure you understand see the signs and make sure you get rest and make sure you get exercise. But like, that's not working for a lot of people. Like, I think we need a different approach. And I had that same experience with volunteerism, which was like, I was a chronic volunteer and it burned me out because I was just like, I couldn't volunteer without giving everything. And at some point I had to just turn off the floodgates and just be like, for my own sake, I cannot volunteer because I know where this leads. But at the same time, I feel like a terrible human being because I'm like, who says no to helping people? Like, how can I live with myself when somebody asks me for help and I say no? Right. But I'm like, until I can figure out how to have balance around volunteerism, I cannot at this point in my life do it. I will write you a check. That's all I can do. But I think it comes down to that idea of like you said, like compartmentalization and just filtering. How do we do that? I don't know. Other than just like you said, like having to kind of step away and say, I have to do something else that is not going to be taxing, and hope that the people who can compartmentalize are able to be in this field as well.
Yeah. And you're right. They don't teach that in the school. And one thing I noticed, especially with the medical field, which maybe with COVID, maybe that will help, but I doubt it though, unfortunately. But it is very much like, yes, you are in the healthcare system, but you are, you're just like someone else working like in an office type of thing. Like, they don't take into consideration all the people that you're trying to help. And then the ramifications of those people that are, the feelings that you get from either helping someone or not being able to help someone, that does create that, the emotional load. And I don't feel like the medical system is doing right by the people that are helping those other people. Like, it's just like, you can't, with that whole saying, you can't help someone or you can't care for someone if your cup is empty, and in the medical field, they don't really think of it like that. And actually when I was working in the clinic, I was trying to go part-time so I could still do what I loved, but at the same time have less time there so it could let me like rest, and it just wasn't an option. So I feel like I hope that they change the way the medical system is, as far as, like you're right, that the whole passion fatigue is very much of an issue. And if you want to keep your employees, doctors, therapists, nurses, everything, they need to find a better solution for that, because otherwise they're going to keep dealing with high turnover because people are getting, burned out.
Well, even the narrative is just like it's a badge of honor to work yourself to the ground, right? Like it, it's and even on a lesser, not even just in daily life. I think this is something I talk about a lot with women on this podcast too, which is just this idea, like as a woman, we are socialized to put ourselves last and to put everybody else before us and to be likable and to behave and all of these things that sort of work in direct opposition to our mental health, and kind of seeing that connection too, which is like but in care professions, like the harder you work and the worse you treat yourself, it's like the better you are at that job. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to figure it out today. I don't.
Yeah.
So now, okay, so moving back to design and kind of getting back into that field, what is it you would say about your ADHD that since your diagnosis, that you feel like has really contributed to your work, or just, what do you love about your ADHD?
I really like that. I have a lot of ideas. Like if I'll talk to someone and then they'll tell me like one thing about their business, and then I'm like, it's like the floodgates open on like all the ideas I have. And I'm like, I wish I could get all this information down on paper. It's happening too fast. I can't, so I'm like trying to take one out of there and be like, okay, remember this one or remember this one. And then if we go on and talk about something else, it's gone. So, I like the creativity aspect of it. I do like that, there's a lot of things that when I do want to learn about something, I really go, I dive deep, and then, who knows how long it's going to take for me to get out of that whole research mode. But I think I like that, both of them, because they kind of work off of each other. Because like you said before, if you like to learn, I love learning too. And it's just like, for me, it's electrifying for me to learn something new or something that's really interesting to me. And so I think whenever I'm learning something, then I'm able to create what I've learned, or at least based on that perspective of it, to me, that's like the best feeling of it. And then being able to kind of, hopefully strategize, like how, this person needs this, this need met or something like that, then I can kind of go from there and kind of create like that timeline, if you will, of like how things are going to happen with their business strategy or their branding strategy, more like it. For me, it's just it's a great experience. And then honestly, whenever I talk to clients, it's very much of like, they talk about something and I can see it like in my mind's eye. Like, I don't know if a lot of people have that feeling, but like I do. And it's whenever I see that, it's like, it's very exciting to me. So I don't know if I've heard a lot of people say that. So I feel like that is one thing I really feel like I have.
Yeah, it's almost like seeing everything, all the steps all at once.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, how do you even describe that? It's like a mental mind map of the present and future all at once. And yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. I feel like I get it for other people, but not for myself. For myself, my whole life is a chaotic mess. When it comes to what is the next step. But often, I feel like we do talk about that a lot, of just like, or even, I feel like that plays in so many different realms of our lives. Like, sometimes when I have like the same argument with my husband over and over and over again, where it's like, let's just skip steps 1 through 12 and get to step 13, because we all know where this is going to land, right?
Right.
Or you like see the writing on the wall so early on in situations. Yes. From like, is that an ADHD thing? What's happening there if it is? That's really interesting. How would you say your outlook on yourself has changed since your diagnosis, in terms of parenting or working? Or, I mean, you're self-employed, so that's like a whole thing.
Yes. I feel like with anyone that's self-employed, they're going to struggle with various things. And then, the whole confidence thing. And for me, I've always struggled with confidence. I mean, you can ask any of my former, bosses. I mean, like, I did great work. But then I thought like, oh, I'm not doing good enough, or, I was always really self-conscious. So now that I'm working for myself, it is, I have those thoughts still. But then like I was trying to reframe them, to help me, not be stuck in that thought process. But really, I think what I've learned most about from being diagnosed is now I'm working on accepting myself and not being so hard on myself. Cause I honestly, before, when I had all these troubles with math and, even science, even though I loved it, it made me feel like I was, like I was stupid. And that was something that I carried with me for a very long time. Like, okay, this person's smarter than me, then I must be stupid type of thing. And because I didn't really know a lot of people that were challenged like me, like with learning this or learning that or whatever. And so everyone I saw was like, okay, they're smarter. I'm not that smart. And it has taken me a while to really know that, okay, I am smart. And even my therapist was even saying that the other day. She was just like, you've gone through this your whole life not knowing that you had ADHD, but she's like, look how far you've come, and she's like, that wasn't just from learning not learning something or learning something. She's like, it's just like your gut, like, has brought you here, like your determination. She's like, and that right there is something that you should be proud of. You have to work harder to get stuff done or to do something than someone else who it comes naturally to, as far as, doing whatever. She's like, that since it takes you a lot longer or it's harder for you to do something, you should be even more proud of yourself. Cause you could say, oh, I don't want to do this and just quit, or but you keep going. So, I mean, for me, it's about accepting those challenges and trying to work with them, as much as I can. And really, I think it's just trying to really accept the things that have happened in the past that I cannot change, and for better or for worse. But now it's more of like, what can I change now, and what can I help in this instance? So, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of talking in circles, and I'm sorry if I am, but I feel like it's just a combination of things. It's like, I am trying to be more accepting. There are things that I still have trouble with, but in the end, with like my therapist's help and then me trying to really embrace that, of making those changes. Cause you know how with an ADHD, or you're like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And then you do it for like a day or two, and then you go back to your old ways, and you're like, why is this not working? And it's because you went back to your old ways. And for me, that's, like a struggle of, I want to make these changes. It just takes me longer to make these changes, cause my mind is wanting to do all this other stuff too. So, I feel like since being diagnosed, it has helped, because it's allowed me to give myself grace in those moments that I may not be showing up as my best self, or that I'm really struggling, and being like, you know what, I'm doing the best that I can. That's all I can do in this moment.
Right. Oh, I love that. Yeah. It's no surprise to me that this has been called piece of shit syndrome, because I had a similar experience with my therapist, where it was like, I think that when our first conversations about ADHD started, and it took years before of her gently mentioning it to me before I actually looked into it. But I would complained to her constantly about how I was getting nothing done, and how I was so lazy, and like I was just so down on myself. And she was always mirroring back to me and being like, how can you talk about yourself like this? Like, all I see from you is like, you started a new business, you wrote a book, you did this, you did, like, it's like, you do so much, and yet you come to me, and when and all you do is talk about yourself like you're this piece of trash. And I was like, yeah, cause I was like, I don't know, it just never landed in that way, right? How other people see you, and how so much of this concept of like, how can I fix this? How can I solve this problem really starts with that self-acceptance and that grace, and having a little bit of patience, which is something we're not really great at, but like to realize that, like, yeah, there are going to be things I struggle with, and there's going to be things I'm great at, and that's life, right? And how can I kind of see the big picture in a way that sometimes we lose? I remember like doing a journaling exercise with Tasha Post, who does ADHD yoga, and she has these amazing part of her monthly membership, she does these journaling reflection guided journaling sessions. And the first time I did one, it was like, okay, sit back and think about all the things you did in this past month. And I was like, are you for real? You want me to list everything I did in the last month? And it was just like, so much. Like, we do so much. It was insane. And I just was like, all right, fine. I get what I see your point here.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that's one thing. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was like, if anybody's feeling like they're not getting much accomplished, I'm like, sit down and start journaling all the things you've done in the last month.
That's a great idea, actually. That is a great idea. And actually, I do want to say that your podcast has helped me with a lot with that. When you said that you felt lazy in the past and like that's how I felt too. So now I am like, you know what, maybe my brain does need a rest, or, you know, I'm not making myself feel like crap because I don't want to do this or that in that moment. You know, I'll do it later on or something like that. Like, that has really helped me to speak to myself differently instead of thinking that negative way about myself.
Oh, you're getting me all choked up. Because I think about like how it has that kind of self-acceptance and that grace has affected, like, it's affected my marriage. It's affected my parenting. You know, I'm like seriously getting emotional, like thinking about how I don't know, how the dominoes fall, right, in different directions, depending on your sense of self, and how this diagnosis has really just opened up so much in terms of like feeling like I'm not a terrible human being. What?
Right. And one thing you did mention before about parenting, that knowing this has helped me too, because I know I was raised completely differently, you know, and there's a different generation. And now that I have my own child, I see stuff like whenever he speaks about something, like he's very outspoken, which I love because that's exactly how I was when I was younger. And so there's things I can see the similarities. And he may not even have ADHD, but I can see that and recognize it and approach it differently than my parents did. And then also when I'm talking to my therapist about various things, you know, she'll give me, advice about, you know, different things that for me, but then I'll also apply it, you know, to my child. And that has, you know, helped tremendously, I feel like, with being, more understanding of that, and like helping with my, with my temper. Like, it's, you know, I feel like I'm more relaxed in that. I'm not like, you know, 0 to 100 and, you know, that type of thing. So I feel like it has helped me with the diagnosis and with the therapy. That has helped me understand myself better, and therefore I can help my son or help someone else better, knowing that, you know, my own issues, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just having that language and just kind of understanding what's actually going on. And then also, like you said, like having just some more tools in your parenting toolbox. Yeah. Aw. It's so, yeah. Ugh. I'm having such a verklempt moment right now. So now, okay, let's talk about your business too, because I want to know, I know you work in, you make website design and graphic design and logos, and how can people find you and work with you? And
well, so like kind of what you're saying, I'm a visual brand strategist. So I do graphic design. That's actually went to school for graphic design, but then my focus is more in with like logos or branding, like the whole, like fonts, colors, all that, like the feeling of that you want people to get from your brand. I do a little bit of like the strategy of like how you, like your voice, but I'm not a writer, or I can write. It just takes me a long time to write. So I always refer out for the writing part if the person's struggling with writing. And really, like I said, I like to do the branding and all that. And then if the person is able to, we can explore that more in the website and then really expand their story from their branding to their website. So it's like a 2-piece thing, but if some people can only do or want to do branding, then that's fine too. I mean, really either one works, but I love that I can work with someone's branding and then go to their website, because I feel like you can really see the whole vision of from their branding to here, and then really get into the storytelling aspect of who they are and what they want to do in their business.
I love that you use braining as a verb.
Oh.
I've never heard that before. I think that's perfect.
I mean, I didn't know what I did, but thank you for, I mean, that's right. Actually, you probably do. So, yeah, I see it as a verb for me all the time. Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, it's like yes, it has it's not a verb, but at the same time it is, because you're creating this whole like feeling behind it. So, yeah, I feel like it is. But like I'm on all the socials, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of them, Facebook, everything like that. So, I mean, I'm at Marisa or www.marisagstudios.com, and Marisa is spelled Marisa. A lot of people want to have two S's, and I don't.
I'll have a link in the show notes too, if people just want to go there. But yeah, actually, I'm just noticing I misspelled your name on my own note page, so I have to be careful of that.
It's okay. It happens all the time. So
my name is misspelled all the time too.
Yes, I misspelled your name in the email.
Oh, right. That's right.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? IE doesn't bother you as much as when I get called Kathy. I don't know why. It drives me crazy. And I think I don't know if I've told this story on the podcast before, but I remember like talking to my husband when I first met him on like our first date. I was like, I hate the name Kathy. It drives me crazy. I've been called Kathy my whole life. I've never met a good Kathy. And my mother-in-law's name is Kathy. And he's just sitting there smiling as I'm telling him this whole rampage over the name Kathy. I know many lovely Kathys, but it was, you just get carried away, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm like, why he didn't run in that moment, I'll never know, but here we are.
Well, maybe he liked your honesty,
obviously 20, almost 22 years later, we're still together. So, he definitely takes me for all of it. But yes, in terms of spelling, and I will make sure I have those in the show notes. And now, speaking of spelling, see what I did here? What if you could name ADHD something else other than that terrible acronym? Would you call it something else?
Yes, I would call it. I put a lot of thought into this. I would call it probably like a creative genius, because even though we're challenged by different things, that I feel like we're good problem solvers that people don't really usually think about, and so I feel like we're really good at that. And since we are really known for our creative side, most of us, I feel like that, we are creative genius in our own ways. And
right. Plus, I think creative genius also sort of lends to some of the inevitable chaos that comes,
exactly,
with everything, right? Of like, you picture those images of like all of the different formulas and equations that are always flying through the air. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like that most days.
Yes, that's me too. Yeah. Yeah. Without that chaos, I feel like, it would affect your creativity. So I think it all goes hand in hand.
Right. And I think that's another part of grace and acceptance that has been really important in my own journey, which is like realizing that you take the good, you take the bad, as they said on Facts of Life. Like there's some things that, all the things that make me creative and passionate and manic energy and all of that comes with the exhaustion and the burnout and some of that stuff. They can't, there's a yin yang relationship there. And so it's made it much easier for me to kind of accept some of the other things that I've always looked at as deficits. And now I'm like, no, they're functional. They have a purpose.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, I totally believe that.
Yeah. Well, this has been so lovely. Thank you so much, Marisa. It's I loved hearing your story, and I think a lot of the stuff that you talked about is going to be deeply relatable. So thank you for coming on and sharing.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And it's an honor to meet you.
Aw, thanks.
Thank you.